All right, when I say the word economy, what pops into your head? For most of us, it's probably stock markets, supply and demand, maybe your own bank account, right? But what if I told you that for almost all of human history, the economy looked absolutely nothing like that? Let's dive into the really cool field of economic anthropology and see what it tells us about who we are.
So let's start with the biggest question of all. What is an economy, really? It sounds so simple, but the answer completely changes depending on who you're asking. Is it some universal system of rational choices and limited resources? Or is it something way more complex and a lot more human?
You know, the standard textbook answer, the one from classical economics, pretty much defines it like this. It's the study of how we make stuff, move it around, and use it. The main characters in this story are always markets, money, supply, and demand. This is the economy of our modern, industrialized world.
But economic anthropology just comes at it from a totally different angle. It asks a much broader question. How do people actually make a life for themselves? And, this is the crucial part, it sees the economy not as some separate machine, but as something completely woven into the very fabric of society and culture.
And this huge difference in perspective? Well, it kicked off one of the biggest debates in the entire field. The central question was, can we really apply the rules of our modern market economy to every single society that has ever existed? Or is that just trying to jam a square peg into a round hole?
The guy who really lit the match on this whole debate was an economic historian named Karl Polanyi. He basically said, look, we've got to be really clear what we mean when we say economics. The formal meaning is that very specific logic of rational choices and scarcity. But the substantive meaning? Well, that's just the real-world story of how humans make a living, and it doesn't need all those assumptions.
And this idea basically split the field into two big camps. In one corner, you had the formalists. They argued that, yeah, the basic principles of economics, things like maximizing your own benefit, dealing with scarcity, they're totally universal. They apply just as much to a hunter-gatherer as they do to a Wall Street broker. But in the other corner, you had the substantivists following Polanyi. They argued that the economy is always embedded within social institutions. Things like religion, kinship, and politics are often what's really driving economic life, not some abstract market logic.
And we're not talking about minor details here. These were fundamental disagreements. Take scarcity. Formalists said it's a universal human condition, period. Substantivists pushed back, saying many societies actually have everything they need. Formalists saw the market as the main stage for exchange everywhere, while substantivists were like, hold on. In many places, markets as we know them don't even exist.
So, if it's not all markets all the time, then what else is there? This is honestly where it gets really interesting. The substantivists started identifying these other powerful ways that societies organize their economic lives, and they're all about social relationships.
Polanyi laid out three core patterns. Now, market exchange, we're all familiar with that one. But he argued that for most of human history, two other systems were way more important: reciprocity and redistribution.
Okay, first up is generalized reciprocity. This is basically giving without keeping a running tally. It's built on trust, on close social ties, and there's no expectation that you'll get something back right away or even something of equal value. The ultimate example? Parents caring for their children. It's the original pay-it-forward system.
Then we have balanced reciprocity. Now here, there is an expectation. When you give something, you're anticipating that you'll get something of similar value back down the line. The perfect example is swapping wedding gifts with friends. It creates a social obligation that strengthens those relationships.
And finally, there's negative reciprocity. This is the most impersonal of the three. It's where both sides are trying to get the better end of the deal. Think about haggling at a flea market or, at its most extreme, theft. The whole point is to maximize what you get, even if it's at the other person's expense. The other huge non-market system is called redistribution. The easiest way to picture this is to imagine goods and food flowing inward to a central point, maybe a chief or a temple, and then flowing back out to the rest of the community. And this isn't just about charity, it's a fundamental way of organizing society.
For a brilliant and kind of extreme example of this, you have to look at the potlatch. This was a massive, competitive feast where a chief would give away, and sometimes even publicly destroy, incredible amounts of wealth. We're talking blankets, canoes, food, you name it. The goal wasn't to get rich. It was to gain incredible social status by proving just how much you could afford to give away.
Another amazing example is the cooler ring. Men would undertake these really dangerous sea voyages just to exchange ceremonial necklaces and armbands that had zero practical use.
The necklaces always traveled clockwise from island to island, while the armbands always went counterclockwise. This whole ritual wasn't about the objects themselves. It was about building lifelong bonds of trust, which then made it safe to trade for the stuff you actually needed, like food and tools.
So, we've talked about how stuff gets exchanged, but where does it all come from in the first place? Beyond just swapping goods, societies have completely different ways of actually producing the things they need. This is what anthropologists call a mode of production.
You can really see 4 major strategies here, and each one has massive implications for how a society works. I mean, you go from the low-density, nomadic life of a hunter-gatherer with simple tools all the way up to the high-density, settled life of intensive agriculture with plows and irrigation. Every step changes literally everything about daily life.
For about 99% of human history, we were all hunter-gatherers. This is the original human economy. It's about living in small, nomadic groups and having this incredibly deep knowledge of the local environment. A great example are the Hadza people in Tanzania. This kind of life demands mobility. You can't be bogged down by a ton of stuff.
But then, around 10,000 years ago, a massive revolution started. We began producing our own food, and this took a few different forms. There's horticulture, which is basically small-scale farming with simple hand tools. There's pastoralism, a life built around herding animals. And finally, you get intensive agriculture, which uses technology like plows to support huge, permanent communities. And that's the foundation for states and empires.
Okay, so you might be thinking, this is all fascinating history, but why does any of this matter today in our super-connected, globalized world? Well, it matters because these different economic ways of being, they haven't just disappeared.
The reality today isn't a world of neat, isolated categories. It's a spectrum, a continuum. That old debate between the formalists and substantivists has had to evolve, because now even the most remote societies on Earth are connected to global markets in some way. A pastoralist might be using a cell phone. A forager might be selling special honey for cash. All these systems are mixing together.
At the end of the day, this field gives us a much richer, more complex view of economic life. It completely challenges that simplistic idea that everyone, everywhere, is just a rational maximizer, trying to get ahead. And that's absolutely crucial for making good, real-world policy. If you try to create a development plan without understanding that for some people, land is about ancestry, not just assets, that plan is almost guaranteed to fail. It forces us to see the deeply human side of any economy.
Which leaves us with one last big question to think about. If the substantivists are right, if the economy is always embedded in our society and culture, then what does our own economic system, with its intense focus on markets, on profit, on individual gain, what does that say about our culture? What are the values we're really exchanging every single day?